All right, I want to talk about Brooklyn Nine-Nine. Specifically, I want to talk about the three-part season 4 premiere, Coral Palms, part 1, 2, and 3. So this is, I think, definitely one of the better episodes of the show. I like when they do these more story-based, multi-part episodes, because it is a show about something that has, these really kind of high-stake moments and things, being a police officer, dealing with all kinds of issues of crime and stuff. And this one does something really interesting. A topic that I find pretty interesting is the idea of having to go into the witness protection program, where Jake and Holt, have to basically go and start these whole new lives over, form these whole new identities. It's a really fascinating concept. Kind of makes you think about like what you would do if you were in that situation and how you would handle it. How long could you take it for? How long could it last? And we see them in these roles where they got these new names, Larry and Greg, and they have to pretend to just be neighbors who don't really have a relationship with each other. And we see a lot of good kind of humor come from this dynamic. And like one of the main conflicts, I think particularly in the first two parts, involves is like Jake is like, I want to just solve the case on our own, get to this sooner, and Holt's like, no, we got to play by the rules, and we have to let the other officers solve this. And it's a really interesting back and forth dynamic. And then it's not until we get later in the three-part episode when Holt finally, gives in his like, you know what, I can't do this either. I can't, handle being in Florida anymore. I can't handle living this kind of life. That's not the one I want to be with, away from my husband and all that. We got to do this on our own. And it's really interesting. There's a lot of good humor that comes from it. The whole sequence when Jake briefly ends up becoming Holt's boss, at that place. That's a really funny thing. But what I like is kind of the story elements. The first part is interesting in the sense that it's all Jake and Holt. We don't see any of the other main characters, which I think is good because I think they needed to do that to kind of set up all the story beats, the situations, and the setting, and all that stuff was going on. But then in the second part, we get introduced with the subplot with the rest of the Nine-Nine, and we get the introduction of someone who's honestly like one of my favorite characters of the whole show, CJ, their new temporary captain, who's just really funny with just how incompetent and unqualified he is, and just his just like bumbling antics just give me so many laughs whenever he's on the show. He's not on the show a lot, but whenever he is, I always really enjoy it. Speaking of the interesting guest stars we get here, we get Maya Rudolph, doing a character who reminds me a bit of her character, the Judge, on The Good Place, the other Michael Schur show. And here she just gets a lot of really good, funny laughs, and his role as like the person who is like constantly kind of keeping an eye on them and keeping them in check and needing to help them with their identities. But I do like the way the story goes when they're like, okay, we're going to just do this on our own. And they end up in jail, when they're on the run from everything. They get the cop played by Jim O'Heir from Parks and Recreation, who plays Jerry there. And he's pretty funny just with his kind of weird incompetence and just his like homophobic values where it's like, oh, they try to start a fight in prison. He doesn't care. And then they start kissing and it's like, oh, I got to just think about this. That's, really funny as far as kind of a subversion of expectations, like what you expect, a cop to do. And it is interesting the way the whole thing deals with the moral dilemmas. If it's like, they're cops, they're supposed to be all about following the law and following the rules, but at one point would they be like, I gotta worry about my own life and my own self-preservation. And you do really get you're invested in the stakes of the story. And the way it all wraps up where they finally get figures and the humorous where they do that, the conclusion of the little story arc where like Amy and Jake are trying to get their relationship back on track after being away from each other for 6 months. It's all really good, funny, enjoyable, and satisfying, and it's all done really well.